The water stopped flowing on the same day Karen Matthews smiled at me over the fence, a cold, satisfied smile that made my blood freeze. 3 weeks later, she sat across from me in that courthouse, her face white as bone, staring at evidence. That would destroy everything she'd built. But the real shock? The secret buried beneath my property that would turn this neighborhood dispute into something far more sinister than either of us ever imagined. Sarah Chen had grown accustomed to the gentle hum of her well pump, a reassuring mechanical heartbeat that had provided crystal clear water to her family's century-old farmhouse for the past 8 years. When she woke that Tuesday morning in September to complete quiet, she knew something was wrong. "Mom, the shower's not working." Her 15-year-old daughter Lily's voice echoed down the hallway, frustrated and soap-sudsed. Sarah threw on her robe and padded barefoot across the kitchen's cold hardwood floors. She turned the tap. Nothing. Not even a gurgle. The digital pressure gauge on the well system read 0. Through the window above the sink, she could see her neighbor Karen Matthews watering her prize-winning rose garden with a satisfied smile, the spray from her hose catching the morning sunlight like scattered diamonds. Karen's own well, installed just 6 months ago despite the city water line running directly to her property, seemed to be working just fine. "Probably just a blown fuse," Sarah muttered, but the electrical panel showed everything normal. The well pump was getting power, but no water was coming up. By noon, she'd called Henderson Well Services. Tom Henderson, a weathered man in his 60s who'd serviced wells in the county for 30 years, arrived with his diagnostic equipment and a grim expression that deepened as he worked. "Mrs. Chen, I need to show you something." Tom's voice carried the weight of bad news. He led her to the wellhead, a discreet concrete cover nestled among the oak trees that bordered her property and Karen's. "Someone's been tampering with this." Sarah's heart stuttered. "Tampering how?" Tom pointed to scratches around the lock mechanism, fresh metal shavings glinting in the dirt. "Lock's been picked, and recently. See these?" He indicated several. Small holes drilled into the well casing. "These weren't here during your last inspection. Someone's introduced something into your aquifer." What kind of something? Could be anything. Dirt, sand, chemicals. Whatever it is, it's clogged your intake screen and contaminated your water source. Tom's weathered hands gestured toward Karen's property. "You have any disputes with your neighbors?" Sarah's mind raced back through the past few months. The property line argument when Karen had installed her new well. The heated words over the easement rights. Karen's insistence that Sarah's century-old well was somehow stealing her groundwater. The anonymous complaint to the county about Sarah's unsafe septic system that had required a $3,000 inspection to disprove. "Maybe," Sarah said quietly. That evening, as Sarah and her family made do with bottled water for dinner, she stood at her kitchen window watching Karen Matthews tend to her garden. Karen moved with the deliberate care of someone who knew she was being observed, her every gesture a performance of innocence. Sarah's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Maybe now you'll consider selling. Some people aren't meant for country living." Her hand shook as she screenshot the message. Through the window, she saw Karen Matthews looking directly at her house, phone in hand. The next morning brought Tom Henderson back with a water testing kit and news that made Sarah's stomach clench. "It's worse than I thought. Your well's been deliberately contaminated with bentonite clay and sodium chloride. This isn't accidental runoff or natural contamination. Someone dumped industrial drilling mud down your well. Can you fix it?" Tom's expression was grave. "I can try to flush the system, but this kind of contamination, it's going to cost thousands to remediate. And there's no guarantee I can restore it to full capacity. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing." Sarah's mind calculated rapidly. $8,000 for well rehabilitation. Maybe more. Money she didn't have, not with Lily starting her junior year and college looming. Her freelance graphic design work barely covered the mortgage as it was. "There's something else," Tom continued. "I checked with the county records. That new well your neighbor installed? It's drilled to 300 feet. Yours only goes to 180. In drought conditions, the deeper well could be pulling water away from yours even without the contamination. Is that legal?" "Technically, yes. But combined with this sabotage." Tom shook his head. "You need to call the sheriff, Mrs. Chen. This is criminal destruction of property." Deputy Martinez arrived that afternoon, young and thorough, taking photos of the well damage and carefully bagging the metal shavings Tom had found. As he worked, Karen Matthews appeared at her property line, pruning shears in hand, close enough to overhear every word. I'll need to interview your neighbor, Deputy Martinez told Sarah. These are serious charges: criminal mischief, contamination of a water source, possibly vandalism in the first degree. Sarah watched Karen's face as the deputy approached. For just a moment, Karen's carefully maintained composure slipped, revealing something cold and calculating beneath. "Officer, I have no idea what Sarah is talking about," Karen said, her voice pitched perfectly between concern and confusion. "I've been nothing but neighborly. In fact, I've been worried about her well for months. That old system isn't up to modern standards." "When did you last see anyone near Mrs. Chen's wellhead?" Karen's pause was just a fraction too long. "I couldn't say. I mind my own business." But Sarah noticed Karen's hands, still dirty from gardening, and the way she positioned herself to block the deputy's view of a small shed behind her house. A shed that hadn't been there 6 months ago. That evening, Sarah's doorbell rang. Karen Matthews stood on her porch, holding a casserole dish and wearing the same cold smile Sarah had seen over the fence. "I thought you and Lily might need a home-cooked meal while you're dealing with your water troubles," Karen said. "It's my grandmother's recipe." Sarah didn't reach for the dish. "Did you contaminate my well?" Karen's smile never wavered. "Sarah, I think the stress is getting to you. Maybe you should consider that offer I mentioned. I know someone who'd pay fair market value for your property. Cash." "My property isn't for sale." "Everything's for sale, dear. It's just a matter of finding the right pressure point." Karen set the casserole on the porch rail. "By the way, I've been thinking about expanding my garden. Maybe putting in a pond where that old oak tree stands. The one on the property line." Sarah's blood chilled. That oak tree was on her side of the property line, but barely. It was also directly above her septic leach field. "You can't touch that tree." "We'll see." Karen turned to leave, then paused. "Oh, and Sarah? You might want to check your homeowner's insurance. I believe contaminated wells can affect coverage. Something about environmental liability." As Karen walked away, her casserole steaming in the evening air, Sarah realized this was far from over. This was a declaration of war from someone who'd already proven she was willing to commit crimes to get what she wanted. But what Sarah didn't know yet was that Karen Matthews had made one critical mistake. In her shed, carefully hidden behind gardening supplies, sat 5 empty containers of bentonite drilling mud and a detailed property survey showing not just Sarah's well, but something else buried beneath the oak tree. Something that would transform this neighborhood dispute into a case that would make county legal history. The next morning, Sarah would discover Karen's second text message. "Last chance to sell. After this weekend, your property value drops to nothing." What Karen Matthews didn't realize was that Sarah Chen had grown up the daughter of a forensic accountant and a retired police detective. And she'd just declared war on someone who knew exactly how to fight back. Sarah Chen had learned 3 things from her mother: always document everything, follow the money, and never let your opponent see you coming. By Thursday morning, she had transformed her kitchen table into a command center that would have made Detective Patricia Chen proud. Property records, water rights documents, and Karen's recent building permits spread across the surface like pieces of a puzzle. Sarah's laptop displayed county tax assessments, and her phone contained 17 screenshots of suspicious text messages. Most importantly, hidden in her bedroom drawer was the small digital recorder her father had taught her to use during their weekend fishing trips. "Mom, you look like you're planning a military campaign," Lily observed, grabbing a granola bar. "Before school." "Something like that." Sarah kissed her daughter's forehead. "Stay at Emma's after school today. I'll pick you up for dinner." After Lily left, Sarah made her first call. "Henderson Well Services, this is Tom." "Tom, it's Sarah Chen. I need you to do something for me, and I need you to keep it completely confidential." 20 minutes later, Tom arrived with his equipment. And a curious expression. Sarah led him not to her contaminated well, but to the property line near the oak tree. "I want you to test the groundwater here," she said, pointing to a spot 10 feet from the tree. "And here." Another spot, closer to Karen's new shed. I need to know if there's been any other contamination in the area. Mrs. Chen, this is going to cost, send me the bill. And Tom, I need those results in writing with exact timestamps and GPS coordinates. As Tom began his work, Sarah positioned herself at her kitchen window with a pair of binoculars. Karen's routine was predictable: coffee on the back porch at 8 a.m., garden work until 10, then inside until lunch. But today, Karen kept glancing toward the oak tree, her movements agitated. At 9:15, Karen's pattern broke. She disappeared into her shed for nearly 20 minutes, emerging with what looked like a small shovel and a black garbage bag. But instead of heading to her garden, she walked directly toward the property line. Sarah grabbed her phone and started recording. Through her camera lens, she watched Karen kneel near the base of the oak tree, clearly on Sarah's property, and begin digging. The woman worked quickly, efficiently, like someone who'd done this before. After 10 minutes, Karen buried the garbage bag and carefully redistributed the fallen leaves to hide any disturbance. Interesting choice of burial ground, Sarah murmured, remembering her father's words: criminals always return to the scene. They can't help themselves. When Karen disappeared back into her house, Sarah called Deputy Martinez. Deputy, I need to report a trespassing and possible evidence tampering. I have video. Martinez arrived within an hour, bringing Detective Ray Castellanos, a sharp-eyed man in his 40s who reminded Sarah of her father's old partner. Mrs. Chen, Deputy Martinez briefed me on your situation. This has escalated beyond simple neighbor disputes. Castellanos examined Sarah's video footage. This shows clear trespassing and suspicious behavior. We'll need to get a warrant for that burial site. Detective, there's something else. Sarah handed him a folder thick with documents. I've been researching Karen Matthews. She's not who she claims to be. Castellanos raised an eyebrow. Explain. Karen Matthews supposedly moved here from Arizona 2 years ago, paid cash for her house, retired early from real estate. But look at this. Sarah spread out her research. No employment records in Arizona under that name. No previous property ownership. Her social security number was issued in Nevada, but she's never lived there according to any public records. Identity theft. Or identity creation. Karen Matthews might not even be her real name. Detective Castellanos studied the documents with growing interest. What made you dig into this? The text messages. They were too calculated, too strategic. This isn't some crazy neighbor, this is someone running a con. Sarah pulled up more files on her laptop. I checked property values in the area. My land, with its water rights and the original farmhouse, is worth significantly more than comparable properties. Someone's been quietly buying up parcels around here through shell companies. Shell companies. Mountain View Holdings LLC purchased the Henderson's old place 6 months ago. Desert Rose Investments bought the Miller Farm last year. Both companies trace back to the same Nevada LLC registered to a P.O. box. Sarah leaned forward. Detective, I think Karen is working with developers to force out long-term residents and assemble a large development tract. The detective's phone buzzed. He answered, listened, then hung up with a grim expression. That was the lab. Your well contamination is even worse than your repair guy thought. Industrial-grade drilling mud, sodium chloride, and something else, PCE. Sarah's blood went cold. What's PCE? Perchloroethylene. Dry cleaning solvent. Highly toxic, and it doesn't occur naturally in groundwater. Someone put dry cleaning chemicals in my well. Mrs. Chen, whoever contaminated your well didn't just want to disable it, they wanted to make your property uninhabitable. PCE contamination can cost hundreds of thousands to remediate. Castellanos closed his notebook. We are looking at felony charges now. Potentially attempted poisoning. That afternoon, while waiting for the search warrant, Sarah made a discovery that changed everything. Hidden in her late grandmother's papers, documents she'd been meaning to organize for months, was an original 1923 survey of the property. The survey showed something that modern maps didn't, a natural spring that fed into an underground stream running directly under the oak tree. More importantly, it showed that the spring originated from a point now located squarely in the middle of Karen's backyard. Sarah stared at the yellowed paper, her mind racing. If the original spring was on Karen's property and if someone had diverted or contaminated it at the source. Her phone rang. Tom Henderson. Mrs. Chen, you need to hear this. Those soil samples you had me take. The contamination isn't just in your well, it's in the groundwater flowing toward your property. Someone's been systematically poisoning the entire aquifer, probably for months. Where's it coming from? Based on the contamination patterns and flow direction, I'd say the source is somewhere on your neighbor's property. Maybe that new well she had drilled. Sarah felt the pieces clicking together. Karen hadn't just sabotaged her well, she'd poisoned the entire water source to make the land worthless, knowing she could later offer to solve the contamination problem as part of a buyout deal. At 4 p.m., Detective Castellanos returned with the search warrant and a forensics team. Sarah watched from her porch as they methodically excavated the spot where Karen had buried the garbage bag. Mrs. Chen, the forensics technician, called out, "You're going to want to see this." Inside the black bag were 3 items that made Sarah's hands shake: empty containers of PCE solvent, a detailed map of the underground water flow beneath both properties, and a contract from Mountain View Holdings LLC offering to purchase Sarah's property for 30% below market value, dated 3 weeks before the well contamination began. But the most damning evidence was a handwritten note in Karen's distinctive script: Phase 2 complete. Begin PCE injection Monday. Chen should be desperate to sell within 30 days. Property acquisition target confirmed. As the forensics team bagged the evidence, Karen Matthews emerged from her house. Her face had gone ashen, but her voice remained steady. "Officers, I don't know what Sarah has told you, but she's clearly having some kind of breakdown. That bag isn't mine." Detective Castellanos held up the handwritten note. We'll need you to provide handwriting samples for comparison." "I want my lawyer." "That's your right. You're also under arrest for contamination of a water source, criminal mischief in the first degree, and conspiracy to commit fraud." As the handcuffs clicked around Karen's wrists, she looked directly at Sarah with undisguised hatred. "You have no idea what you've just done," Karen hissed. "This goes so much deeper than you think." But Sarah was ready for that too. As Karen was led to the patrol car, Sarah held up her phone, showing the recording app that had been running throughout the entire arrest. "Actually, Karen, or whoever you really are, I think I'm starting to figure it out." That evening, as Sarah finally had clean water flowing from her taps thanks to Tom's emergency filtration system, she received a call that would turn her victory into something far more complex. "Mrs. Chen. This is Attorney Janet Morrison with the Nevada State Bar. I understand you've been investigating a woman named Karen Matthews. We've been looking for her too. Her real name is Catherine Manning, and she's wanted in connection with a multimillion-dollar real estate fraud that destroyed an entire retirement community." Sarah's kitchen had become an unofficial FBI field office. By Friday morning, 3 federal agents sat around her table alongside Detective Castellanos, Attorney Morrison appearing via video conference, and a stern woman in a Navy suit who'd introduced herself only as Agent Park from Financial Crimes. "Mrs. Chen, what you've uncovered here is the tip of a very large iceberg," Agent Park explained, spreading aerial photographs across the table. "Catherine Manning, Karen Matthews, is part of a sophisticated criminal organization that's been targeting rural communities across 7 states. Sarah stared at the photos showing her neighborhood from above, but with overlays marking property acquisitions, contamination sites, and what looked like planned development zones. "The scheme is always the same," Attorney Morrison's voice crackled through the laptop speakers. "They identify communities with valuable water rights or development potential. Then they systematically drive down property values through contamination, harassment, or infrastructure sabotage. Once they've acquired enough parcels at reduced prices, they remediate the contamination and develop high-value projects." "How many communities?" Sarah asked. "At least 12 that we know of. In Nevada, they destroyed the water supply for an entire retirement community of 300 homes. People lost everything. Their homes became worthless. Their retirement savings evaporated. 3 elderly residents died from stress-related illnesses during the forced relocations. Detective Castellanos leaned forward. What's the connection? To our case. Agent Park pulled up a file thick with surveillance photos. Catherine Manning is what we call a site manager. She moves into target communities, establishes a false identity, and implements the contamination strategy while her partners handle the financial side. But she made a mistake here. What kind of mistake? She picked the wrong target. Agent Park smiled grimly. Mrs. Chen, your property sits on what our geological survey indicates is the primary aquifer for this entire region. Whoever controls your land controls the water rights for approximately 2,000 acres of potential development. Sarah felt the room spinning. You're saying my 8 acres are the key to some massive development project? Your 8 acres and the underground spring that feeds the entire aquifer. Without your property, their development plans are worthless. Agent Park opened another file. Mountain View Holdings, Desert Rose Investments, and 4 other shell companies have spent the past 2 years quietly assembling parcels around your property. Conservative estimate of their investment so far, $15 million. All dependent on getting my land. Exactly. And when contamination and harassment didn't work, we believe they were prepared to escalate to more dangerous methods. Detective Castellanos interrupted. Speaking of escalation, we have an update on Manning's interrogation. She's not talking, but her phone records revealed something interesting. He pulled out a transcript. 3 calls to a number registered to Marcus Webb, known associate with ties to environmental crimes and intimidation tactics. Where's Webb now? That's the problem. He checked out of his motel yesterday, about 2 hours after Manning's arrest. His car was spotted heading toward Mrs. Chen's neighborhood. Sarah's blood chilled. Is Lily safe at school? We have a unit at the school and another at your friend's house where she's staying, Agent Park assured her. But Mrs. Chen, we need to discuss protective custody. I'm not running from my home. These people have killed before. In Arizona, a rancher who refused to sell died in what looked like an accidental well collapse. In Colorado, a family's house burned down with electrical problems after they went public about water contamination. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Your daughter walks home from school at 3:15. Funny how accidents happen to stubborn people. The room exploded into activity. Agent Park was on her radio. Detective Castellanos called for additional units, and Sarah grabbed her car keys. Mrs. Chen, we need you to stay here, Agent Park commanded. That's my daughter they're threatening. Which is exactly why we need you safe. This could be a setup to draw you out. Before anyone could stop her, Sarah's phone rang. The caller ID showed Lily's number. Mom. Lily's voice was small, scared. There's a man in a truck following the school bus. Emma's mom called the police, but the line went dead. Sarah was out the door before the agents could react, Detective Castellanos close behind. As they raced toward the school, his radio crackled with updates. All units, suspect vehicle spotted at Lincoln Elementary. Gray pickup, Nevada plates. Unit 12 responding. School in lockdown. Suspect fled on foot. K9 units en route. They reached the school to find it surrounded by police cars, students being evacuated to the gymnasium. Sarah spotted Lily among a group of teenagers near the main entrance and ran to her. Mom, I was so scared. This man got out of his truck and started walking toward the school, but then all the police cars came. You're safe now. Sarah held her daughter close, but over Lily's shoulder, she could see Agent Park approaching with a grim expression. Mrs. Chen, we need to talk. Webb got away, but he left something behind. In the school parking lot, Webb's abandoned truck contained a revelation that made Sarah's stomach drop. Detailed surveillance photos of her daily routine, Lily's schedule, maps of her property showing entry points, and most chilling of all, architectural plans for a luxury resort development, titled Oakwood Springs Resort and Spa. The resort was designed to encompass nearly 3,000 acres, including Sarah's property as the centerpiece, with the tagline, "Where natural springs meet modern luxury." Mrs. Chen, Agent Park said quietly, this isn't just about your land anymore. This is about a $100 million development project that your refusal to sell has put in jeopardy. That evening, Under FBI protection in a downtown hotel, Sarah received a call that changed everything yet again. Sarah, this is Tom Henderson. I'm sorry to bother you, but I've been thinking about that old survey you showed me. I went back and checked the county geological records from the 1920s. What did you find? That spring on your property. It's not just any spring. According to the original geological survey, it's connected to an underground river system that the Paiute tribe considered sacred. There are federal protection laws that could apply. Sarah sat up straighter. What kind of protection laws? If we can prove the spring has historical and cultural significance to Native American tribes, it could be designated as protected land. That would make any large-scale development legally impossible. Tom, are you saying? I'm saying that spring might be the one thing that could shut down this entire development project permanently. But Sarah, if these people find out about the federal protection angle, they might decide it's easier to just eliminate the problem entirely. As if summoned by Tom's words, Sarah's phone buzzed with another text. Last chance. Accidents happen to people who don't know when to quit. But this time, Sarah smiled as she forwarded the message to Agent Park. Because tomorrow morning, she would be making a call that would turn Catherine Manning's greed into the weapon of her own destruction. The call would be to Dr. Elena Clearwater, tribal historian and her grandmother's old friend, who had been waiting 70 years to reclaim her people's sacred spring. Dr. Elena Clearwater arrived at dawn like a force of nature wrapped in traditional Paiute dress and carrying a weathered leather satchel that had belonged to her great-grandmother. At 78, she moved with the purposeful grace of someone who had spent decades fighting for her people's rights, and her dark eyes held the kind of fire that had faced down federal bureaucrats and corporate lawyers alike. Sarah Chen, she said, embracing Sarah on the hotel room balcony. Your grandmother Ruth spoke of you often. She knew this day would come. Dr. Clearwater, I don't understand. What day? Elena opened her satchel and withdrew a collection of photographs, documents, and what appeared to be hand-drawn maps. The day the sacred spring would need protecting again. Your grandmother was the keeper of our stories, Sarah. She never told you about the agreement. Agent Park, who had been listening from the doorway, stepped forward. What agreement? Elena spread a document on the small table, yellowed with age but bearing official seals. In 1952, when the government was forcing tribal relocations, your grandmother Ruth Chen helped hide our sacred objects and documented the locations of our holy sites. In return, our tribal council named her an honorary guardian of the spring. Sarah stared at the document, recognizing her grandmother's signature. Grandmother never mentioned this. She was waiting for the right time. The spring has been under threat before, developers in the 1980s, mining companies in the 1990s. Each time, Ruth quietly discouraged the projects, but she knew someday a threat would come that she couldn't handle alone. Elena pulled out aerial photographs from different decades, showing the gradual development around Sarah's property. We've been watching. When Catherine Manning began her contamination scheme, our tribal lawyers started preparing. Agent Park examined the documents with growing excitement. Dr. Clearwater, if this spring is on the Federal Registry of Sacred Sites, it's not just on the registry, Elena interrupted. Under the American Indian Religious Freedom Act and the National Historic Preservation Act, this spring and the surrounding watershed are protected from any development that would disrupt the natural water flow. That includes a 50-acre buffer zone. Sarah felt the ground shifting beneath her feet. 50 acres. Which encompasses not only your property, but the planned resort site, the contaminated aquifer, and most of the parcels these criminals have been acquiring. Elena's smile was sharp as a blade. Their entire development project is built on land that cannot legally be developed. Agent Park was already on her phone. I need to speak with the U.S. Attorney immediately. We may have grounds for federal intervention under environmental protection statutes. But Sarah's attention was drawn to movement outside the hotel window. A familiar grey pickup truck was parked across the street, and Marcus Webb was standing beside it, talking on his phone while watching their building. He found us, Sarah whispered. Elena followed her gaze and her expression hardened. Then it's time to end this. Sarah, I need you to trust me completely. 2 hours later, Sarah found herself standing on her own property for the first time in 3 days, but now surrounded by an unlikely coalition: FBI agents, Detective Castellanos, Tom Henderson with his well equipment, Dr. Clearwater with tribal representatives, and a team of federal environmental inspectors. Catherine Manning sat in the back of an FBI vehicle, her perfectly maintained composure finally cracking as she watched the scene unfold. She had been brought here as part of a plea bargain negotiation, but what she was witnessing clearly wasn't what she'd expected. Dr. Clearwater, Agent Park announced loudly enough for Manning to hear, "Please show us the exact boundaries of the protected watershed." Elena walked to the oak tree where Manning had buried the evidence, placing her hand on the ancient bark. "The spring emerges here, at the base of this tree. The water flows underground for nearly a mile before surfacing again." She gestured in a wide arc encompassing not just Sarah's property, but the entire planned development area. "All of this is sacred ground." From the FBI vehicle, Manning's voice carried across the yard, "You can't be serious. There's no way some old Indian legend can stop a $100 million project." Elena turned slowly to face her, and when she spoke, her voice carried the authority of generations. "Ms. Manning, this isn't legend. This is federal law. And as of this morning, this site has been granted emergency protection status." Agent Park held up official documents. "Catherine Manning, you and your associates are now facing additional federal charges: violation of the American Indian Religious Freedom Act, destruction of federal protected land, and conspiracy to circumvent federal environmental protection laws. Each charge carries a minimum sentence of 10 years. Manning's face went white. "That's impossible. We researched this property thoroughly." "You researched the surface rights," Dr. Clearwater replied. "You never bothered to investigate the cultural and spiritual significance. Your contamination didn't just destroy a well, you poisoned sacred water that has flowed uninterrupted for over 1,000 years." Tom Henderson, who had been taking water samples throughout the conversation, looked up from his equipment. "Dr. Clearwater, there's something else. The contamination pattern suggests the source isn't just Manning's property, it's coming from multiple injection points across the entire development area." Elena nodded grimly. "They've been systematically poisoning the entire sacred watershed." Agent Park's radio crackled. "Unit 7 to base. We have Webb in custody. He was attempting to access the Chen property from the North Access Road. Vehicle contained industrial drilling equipment and 50 gallons of PCE." 50 gallons, Tom whispered. They were planning to contaminate the entire aquifer system. Dr. Clearwater walked to the spring source, kneeling to place her hands in the clear water that bubbled up from deep underground. When she stood, her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "This spring has survived ice ages, droughts, and a century of development pressure. It will not be destroyed by greed." She turned to Manning in the FBI vehicle. "Ms. Manning, you've made one critical error. You thought you were fighting one woman for 8 acres of land, but you've actually been fighting an entire people for their most sacred site." Manning's composure finally shattered completely. "You don't understand. This project employs thousands of people, creates jobs, brings revenue. Built on lies, contamination, and the desecration of sacred land," Elena replied quietly. "There are some things that cannot be bought, Ms. Manning. You should have learned that before you decided to poison a 1,000-year-old spring." Agent Park approached the FBI vehicle with a final set of documents. "Catherine Manning, in light of the additional federal charges and the evidence of systematic environmental terrorism, the plea bargain is off the table. You're looking at a minimum of 30 years in federal prison." But the most devastating blow came from Dr. Clearwater's final revelation. "Ms. Manning, I have one more thing to share with you. The Tribal Council met in emergency session this morning. We've decided to purchase, at fair market value, every property in the contaminated area that your organization forced people to sell below market rates. Those families will get their homes back, and this entire watershed will be placed under permanent tribal protection." Manning stared at her in shock. "How? You don't have that kind of money." Elena smiled. "Federal environmental restoration grants, combined with the lawsuit settlement for the contamination damage, plus the seizure of your organization's assets, it adds up to approximately $40 million. More than enough to restore this community and ensure nothing like this ever happens again." As the FBI vehicle pulled away with Catherine Manning inside, Sarah stood beside the ancient oak tree, watching clear water flow from her well for the first time in weeks. Dr. Clearwater joined her, placing a weathered hand on her shoulder. Your grandmother would be proud, Sarah. You didn't just save your home, you saved our most sacred place. But their moment of victory was interrupted by Agent Park's urgent voice. Dr. Clearwater, Mrs. Chen, we have a problem. Manning just received a call from someone claiming to be her lawyer. The call was traced to a location less than 2 miles from here. We think there are other members of this organization still in the area. Elena's expression hardened again. Then this isn't over yet. Sarah looked at the spring, then at her restored well, then at the woman who had become an unexpected ally. What do we do? We finish what your grandmother started, Elena replied. But Sarah, the next 24 hours are going to be the most dangerous yet. These people have lost everything, and desperate criminals do desperate things. As if to underscore her words, Sarah's phone buzzed with a final message. The spring dies tonight. Your daughter dies with it. At midnight, Sarah Chen stood alone beside the ancient oak tree, a lone figure in the moonlight with nothing but a small flashlight and her grandmother's courage. To any observer, she appeared vulnerable, isolated, the perfect target for desperate criminals with nothing left to lose. What those observers couldn't see were the 12 FBI agents positioned throughout the woods, the thermal imaging equipment tracking every movement within a half-mile radius, or Dr. Elena Clearwater and her nephew Jake, a former Army Ranger, hidden in the old storm cellar beneath Sarah's house. Most importantly, they couldn't see Lily, safe in federal protective custody 50 miles away, despite the elaborate deception that had placed a teenage FBI trainee in her bedroom window earlier that evening. Sarah's earpiece crackled softly. Movement from the north, Agent Park's voice whispered. 3 subjects approaching your position. Through the trees, Sarah could make out the shapes of 3 men moving carefully toward the spring. She recognized Marcus Webb's bulk immediately, but the other 2 were strangers, professionals by the way they moved, scanning for threats while maintaining formation. Mrs. Chen, Webb's voice carried across the clearing as the men stepped into the moonlight. Smart of you to come alone. You said you'd leave my daughter alone if I cooperated. That depends on how cooperative you are. Webb gestured to his companions. These gentlemen represent some very unhappy investors, people who've lost a lot of money because you couldn't mind your own business. One of the strangers stepped forward, a thin man with cold eyes and expensive clothes that looked out of place in the forest. Mrs. Chen, I'm going to make this simple. You're going to sign papers transferring your property to us, and you're going to tell the FBI that you lied about the contamination. And if I refuse, then your daughter's school receives a very unfortunate package tomorrow morning. Something that will make this little water contamination look like a swimming pool accident. Sarah felt ice in her veins, but she forced herself to remain calm. What kind of package? The thin man smiled without warmth. The kind that closes schools permanently. You have 5 minutes to decide. But Sarah had already decided. She raised her voice slightly, knowing her words were being recorded. You're talking about terrorism, about murdering children. I'm talking about business, Mrs. Chen. Sometimes business requires extreme measures, like poisoning sacred tribal land. Webb laughed harshly. Sacred land. Lady, there's no such thing as sacred when there's $100 million at stake. Actually, Dr. Elena Clearwater's voice rang out from the darkness. There is. Elena emerged from the trees accompanied by Jake and what appeared to be a dozen tribal representatives. But Sarah knew that half of those representatives were FBI agents in ceremonial dress, part of an elaborate plan they'd conceived that afternoon. Dr. Clearwater, the thin man said, his confidence faltering. This doesn't concern your people. Everything concerning this spring concerns my people. And everything concerning terrorism against children concerns the FBI. Elena's voice carried across the clearing like judgment itself. Did you really think we'd let you threaten a school full of innocent children? The clearing suddenly blazed with floodlights as FBI agents emerged from every direction, weapons drawn. Agent Park's voice boomed through a megaphone. Federal agents. You're surrounded. But Webb was already moving, pulling a pistol and grabbing Sarah before the agents could react. Nobody moves or she dies. Mr. Webb, Elena said calmly, still walking forward despite the gun pointed at Sarah's head. You're standing on ground that has been sacred to my people for over 1,000 years. Do you know what that means? It means nothing, old woman. It means you're trespassing on federal protected land while threatening terrorism against children. It means you've just guaranteed yourself life in federal prison. Elena stopped. 10 feet away, her eyes locked on Webb's. But more than that, it means you've awakened something you don't understand. What the hell are you talking about? Elena gestured toward the spring, where the water seemed to catch and reflect the floodlights with unusual intensity. This spring has protected itself for a millennium. Did you think your greed would be any different from all the others who tried to destroy it? Webb's confusion lasted just long enough for Jake Clearwater to move. The former ranger appeared, behind Webb like a shadow, disarming him with military precision before the man could react. Sarah stumbled forward into Agent Park's protective arms as the three criminals were quickly subdued. Marcus Webb, James Delaney, Anthony Torino, Agent Park announced formally, "You're under arrest for terrorist threats against a school, conspiracy to commit mass murder, environmental terrorism, and violation of federal protected lands." But the night's revelations weren't finished. As the prisoners were loaded into FBI vehicles, Agent Park approached Sarah with a final folder. "Mrs. Chen, we found something in Webb's truck that you need to see." The folder contained architectural plans, but not for the resort they'd already seen. These plans showed a massive industrial chemical plant designed to process fracking waste, a facility that would have poisoned not just the sacred spring, but the entire regional water supply. 400 miles. The resort was just the cover story, Agent Park explained. The real plan was to turn this entire area into a toxic waste processing facility. The contamination would have been so severe that the land would have been uninhabitable for generations. Elena studied the plans with growing horror. They weren't just trying to steal our sacred spring, they were planning to turn it into an environmental dead zone. Sarah felt the magnitude of what they'd prevented settling over her like a weight. How many people would have been affected? Conservative estimate: 200,000 people across 3 counties. The contamination would have reached the Colorado River within 5 years. Dr. Clearwater walked to the spring, kneeling to place her hands in the clear water one more time. When she stood, tears were flowing freely down her weathered cheeks. "Sarah, do you understand what your grandmother really did? What you've done?" "I think I'm beginning to." Your grandmother didn't just help hide sacred objects during the relocations. She helped save the last free-flowing sacred spring in this entire region. And tonight, you help save it again, not just for my people, but for everyone who depends on clean water. Agent Park closed her notebook. "Mrs. Chen, the full extent of this criminal organization is still being uncovered, but preliminary estimates suggest they were planning similar operations in at least 6 other states. Your refusal to sell didn't just save your property, it exposed a network that could have poisoned millions of people." As dawn broke over the spring, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Sarah found herself sitting on her grandmother's old porch swing with Lily, who had been brought back at first light. The well pump-hummed quietly in the background, and the ancient oak tree swayed gently in the morning breeze. "Mom," Lily said quietly, "Dr. Clearwater told me about great-grandmother Ruth, about how she was a guardian. What do you think about that?" Lily was quiet for a long moment. "I think maybe being a guardian runs in our family." 6 months later, Sarah stood in a federal courtroom in Denver as Judge Maria Santos handed down the final sentences. Catherine Manning received 35 years for environmental terrorism and fraud. Marcus Webb got life without parole for terrorist threats against children. The thin man, James Delaney, received 40 years for conspiracy to commit mass murder. But the most satisfying moment came when the judge announced the restitution. The seized assets of the criminal organization, totaling over $60 million, would be used to establish the Ruth Clearwater Foundation for the protection of sacred waters throughout the American West. Outside the courthouse, Dr. Elena Clearwater embraced Sarah one final time. "Your grandmother's work is complete," Elena said. "The spring is protected forever. What happens now?" "Now you go home to your daughter and your clear water and your ancient oak tree. And you remember that some battles are fought not just for ourselves, but for all the generations who will come after us." That evening, as Sarah sat by the spring watching the water flow clear and pure in the setting sun, she received one final text message. Not a threat this time, but from Tom. Henderson, Mrs. Chen, I've got good news. The spring is flowing stronger than it has in 50 years. Almost like it's celebrating. Sarah smiled, thinking of her grandmother Ruth and all the other guardians who had protected this place across the centuries. The spring would flow on, sacred and free, carrying its ancient waters toward a future that was now secure. And in the distance, she could hear Lily laughing as she helped Dr. Clearwater plant traditional healing herbs around the base of the oak tree, the next generation of guardians already learning their sacred duty.